Alright, in this video we are going to do some basic slicing techniques just on the first method of slicing that's available, which is the slice tool. So in order to start off, what you're going to end up doing is double clicking on your PSD file, wherever that may be placed, and it will open up your file within Photoshop. And from here you want to make sure that you have two options available off the start. So the first being the rulers, which are available by Control R, or going up to View and hitting Rulers. And then the other one is your guides, and that will be Control colon. That will toggle your guides on and off at this point. These will generally help you align specific slicing or slices and figure out how you're going to lay out these exact objects. So normally what you'll find is you'll have a grid made out of these slices already, or out of these guidelines already, and what you want to do then is clean off any that you may not necessarily need. So we aren't going to need any of these vertical ones. I tend to leave the horizontal ones so I can always see what the grid pattern is that I need to follow. And we're just going to clean up and not worry about this bottom area just yet. So with this slicing method, we're going to look at doing some basic slices. We don't want to go too in depth in this process for these elements, otherwise it will get too messy, and the other methods are a little bit easier to do this, so we'll catch any additional slices afterwards. But if you double click on your magnifying glass, or click once on your magnifying glass, you can zoom in, and then if you hold the space bar, you'll notice you have a little hand there. You can actually click and drag while holding space to move your canvas around and make sure that everything is aligned how you want it. So a couple things that we're going to be doing first is actually slicing out this background image using the slice tool, which is generally on default hidden under the crop option. So if you click and hold on the fourth or fifth icon down, you'll have additional options that you can select, and that little arrow is what shows you those are available. And you're going to choose the slice tool for the most part. This is going to be the one we'll be using in this little tutorial section. From here, we want to make sure that we know exactly what we're going to slice. So I'm just going to highlight with the marquee tool right now. We're going to want to slice out this large background image, clean it up a little bit, and make sure that we don't have anything kind of going over the overall slice that we want to get. The second one we're going to do is this simple image right here. And last and not least, we will be doing these little logos at the bottom of the page. And these are all generally the easiest ones to slice out using this method. So the first thing you're going to end up doing is grabbing your guidelines and doing a generalized placement of what area you want to slice. So we know that this has to cover up, and just for optimization purposes, we're not going to worry about what exactly is behind this white box. We're going to place just the guideline here, so we're just cutting into that ever so slightly, and that way if we need a little wiggle room after, we can use it. The second one we're going to place just at the top of this tent, so we're trying to optimize the image as much as possible in this process. After that, what you're going to want to do is grab a couple of vertical lines and place them just on the edges of this large background image as well. And we just want to make sure that from here we're going to be able to center it easily, as well as not get any pixel marks like 213 or 208.5. We want to make sure that it's something that is fairly usable when we start doing this. So we're going to go with trying to slice just to this area and make sure that we get just enough padding to make it work. The other, once we do that one, we're just going to go and highlight the other areas the same way. So get these guidelines and place them here. This one we can use this vertical line because if you're doing this page on a grid system, you'll be able to just drag or drop that in place with the grid CSS elements. And we're going to just place it on the end of that little line here, so that way we're not cutting off any image. And what you want to do is generally magnify into that specific area and just make sure your slices are alright. So to move around these guidelines, you're going to want to have the actual arrow tool set and the, I guess it's move toggle. But this way you'll be able to just finesse these lines ever so slightly, making sure that your slices are going to be as close cut as you can possibly get them. And from there, again, we can move down to the bottom. If double clicking on the magnifying glass, we'll go back to 100%. And we're going to just drag and hold and go down to the bottom. Now if you find that you have a marquee highlighting something still, you can always go up to edit and deselect, or easy enough is Control D will get rid of that marquee outline for you. And from there, we're going to start just looking at these, making sure that the alignment of these are all right and we can follow these lines close enough. Just getting them nice and tight, making sure that we know what we're going to be slicing and not slicing too many additional white pixels that we aren't going to need in the future. Otherwise it'll make the CSS just a little bit more harder. So at that point, what we're going to do is just start off by grabbing our slice tool, clicking on the top corner of where you've started slicing these objects, and highlighting just that guide, or those guidelines that you've placed. And you'll notice that the width is 1073 by 503. That's something we'll tweak out in the future just to make sure that we get some accurate, easy numbers to jot down and remember. From there, you're going to do the same with the rest of the images. This one I'm slightly less worried about the width and height, only because it is a content image and it will only be used once for the most part. The other one, this main background image, could be used in a more global setting. And last would be these little logos at the bottom of the page, and we'll just drag and drop our little slice lines. So when it comes down to cases that you notice you don't necessarily need all that space, it's generally a preference that if you want to slice out the rest, you possibly could, but best bet is always to just go for as tight as possible and use the CSS to finesse it afterwards. So from there, what we're going to look at doing now is just tweaking these lines that we've placed in, and you can actually see what's active slices by these little icons up here, and they'll turn blue if they're a user-defined slice, or they'll be gray if they're just a general slice that is due to slices being placed into specific areas. So we're going to click and hold back on the slice tool, and we're going to choose the slice select tool just to click on these and try and get rid of some of those extra pixels. So we noticed we had 703, I believe, on this one. And what we're going to want to do is 1073. So what we're going to want to do is just finesse it a little bit. And most likely it's going to be off of this left side here. So we're going to try and cut down to 3 pixels on it. And if you zoom in and just as close as you can, or as close as necessary, because sometimes they snap to grids, you can just finesse and get that little spot selected. And we're going to click hold the hand tool and move down to where the next box is and do the same. So we're going to hit 1070 by 500. And another method that you can see as you're clicking and holding this, you can actually look in the top right corner. Since I can't move my mouse, it doesn't help. But within that info palette above the color swatches, you can see that there's height and width showing of 1070 by 500. And that'll tweak as you move this box up and down if you want to make sure that everything's accurate. So from there, we're going to move down to the second image and do something similar. Make sure that we click on the area with this Slice Select tool, and we're just going to put it right on the edge of that guideline. We're going to take off that 1 pixel. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit further by hitting Control+. That's going to get nice and close on the image. And from there, I'm going to keep going in until I start seeing little pixel renderings. And this is a case where the guideline's actually messing me up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is zoom back out by Control-, click on the little arrow tool, and just get that guideline out of the way so I can just finish this slice. So I'll go back, click on my slice tool one more time. This way I'm not going to get it snapping to that grid, and still have to zoom in as close as possible to get the 1 pixel that I'm trying to get off of there. Then I'm going to double click on the magnifying glass to go back to a full size. I'm also going to check out check out the size of this specific image because I don't remember the numbers, by using this marquee tool and just going at the top of this image, right where my slice is, highlighting it, and now I can see in that info palette again that it's 280 by 442. So I could lose that 2 pixels on the height, but it doesn't matter as much since it's not going to affect the upper padding or the lower padding of this image. From there, I'm just going to hit Control-D one more time to get rid of my little dancing ants. And I'm going to go back to the bottom and do the next couple images. So again, I'm going to click on my tool for checking out slices and selecting them. Zoom in using Control+, and just make sure that I'm getting what I want out of these. So I want to make sure it's 220. You can actually see that I'm extremely close to the edge here of this L, but I'm not cutting off any of those extra little pixels. So I'm just going to turn off the grids for a second by hitting Control:, and you can see how with these files it's still slightly rasterized. We want to make sure we get that pixel line or else it's going to look slightly off. We're going to do the same to this bottom area, and we're just going to zoom in as close as we can for it, just to make sure that we're not going to slice off that last pixel line. So if we go right here, we're going to hit that bottom edge of the image, and we can just drag and check the rest of that image. So I'm going to double click on the magnifying again and move back out. I'm going to turn my guides back on by Control:, and I'm going to zoom into this next image. So using the hand tool, we're going to look where this line is being placed, and I want to put a grid up there so that way I can try and align these images as close as possible. So I'm just going to drag, and it's going to click to that selection already there. So I'm going to move back to this image, and what I'll do is the same thing. Click on the slice tool, the select slice tool, click on the slices, and start going. And what you can notice here is that the grid actually goes over that little chunk of the C. We want to make sure that we keep that and we're not going to lose it, so we're going to zoom in again. Just make sure that we're not going to lose that element, as well as we're going to tighten up around the Canadian flag here. So just go right up to that line. Double click on the magnifying glass, zoom out, and I'm just going to do the same and check this side as I go. So I'm extremely close, but I'm just going to tighten it up ever so slightly more, that last pixel, so that way I'm getting it as close as I humanly can. So what you can notice here is I've now altered where the height of this box is, and just for the sake of cleaning up the CSS after, I'm going to just drop the guideline and lock it to this specific one, and just go back to this library block and click with the slice select and let it lock to that guide that I've just placed down, so these two images have the exact same height to them. And from there you can notice we can select this last TD logo, and we can do the same thing. Make sure the height's the same just for the ease of placement. And we're just going to tighten it up around this area. So I'm going to zoom in by Control plus some more, get nice and tight in there, check, just drag and drop wherever I can, use the hand to move over, and same thing. So the only area that we have a little bit of buffer white space that necessarily isn't amazing but good enough is just here. So that way we only need to do it once. I'll double click and get that going again. So these are pretty much all of the slices we're going to take in this method. We're not going to take any more, only because if we start taking more, as you can notice that these little gray boxes start popping up all over the place, and it gets extremely confusing extremely fast. So we're actually going to go back up to the top of the image, and we're going to start looking at cleaning out these areas now. So what you're going to want to do is click on the Move and Toggle tool, the arrow at the top, and you're going to want to make sure that Auto Select is active. I think by default it's off. So in this method we're going to use this, and this is going to allow us to click right on an object, and what you'll notice is that the layers panel is going to jump exactly to where that layer is. From there you're going to turn off the little eyeball, and that's going to indicate your layer visibility. You can play around with it. If you hit the wrong object, you can always turn it back on. And then we're going to take off this shadow already, which we can now see click is going to be that one with the color overlay effect on it. We're going to turn that one off. We're also going to turn off anything around there. So I know these aren't necessary for this slice. The same thing with this text. This text is a text that you can get from Google Fonts. We're not going to slice any of this text. We're going to make sure it's as accessible as possible. And now here comes a little bit of the challenging part, where let's turn off how to participate. We're going to turn off this tab. And actually what you can do is, if you notice that these objects are in a specific folder, you can click on this arrow up and down to check that out. You can actually just click on the eyeball for that specific folder to make sure that those layers are turned off. From there, you're going to want to turn off this. Well, you can see I got the wrong one in that section, so we can just click until we get the right blue area. I'm going to just turn that off as well. So this is where the challenge starts coming in. So if I turn off this white box, you can notice it starts affecting the other image. So we're going to leave that one on. And what we're going to do is just use this arrow. We're going to click on this box, and then you can either just drag it down a little bit, or I'm just going to use the history to go back a little bit. You can click on that one layer, click off the auto select, and just drag. So when auto select isn't selected, it's only going to move the layer that you've already chosen. So we're going to just drag that under the slice that we need. So that way it's not impacting our blue area that we're looking at. And we've still got everything nice and clean. So we can turn off the guides now with Control:, and see that we've got this entire image set up and ready to go. And if you look at this one, it's already ready to go. There's no issues. Same with these bottom ones. There's no more issues with having to remove those backgrounds, since the white is fine the way it is. We don't need to make this image transparent background. It can just be on white just for optimization purposes. What you'll notice is this history panel, as you click, even it doesn't work for turning off layers, but as you move items or resize your slicing, if you ever have any issues with this, you can just go back to this panel, click on the little, you don't want to click on that, you want to click on the exact layer that it's showing, and it's going to put all those layers back to the way that you initially had it. So we're going to go back to this move, because that's what we've just done. And we're going to look at the next challenge. The next one that I can see is the way that this background gradient is actually working right now. And the challenge is going to be that if we leave that background, but we're going to try and remove that background actually, just to show what happens. So I have page backgrounds right here, so we can click that off. Then we've got another default background layer available that I'm going to turn off as well. What you can notice in this image is that it's not very clean, just because it's an illustration, and the initial reason behind this specific issue is that everything that the illustrator provided was baked in already and not easily cleanable. You don't necessarily want to go around all these lines and clean everything out for all these objects. You just want to get it done. But this also causes a challenge with that background gradient. So if I turn that back on, you can now notice that there's this gradient going through the center of the image. This is where you would generally talk to the designer and ask if you can move down this gradient. And in this case, it's going to be fine because it's not going to impact the design at all by just moving this gradient down. Okay, we lose a little bit of the blue in the water, but let the designer make that choice of if that is a potential fix for the issue. And then what you can do is just click on this background layer when you have that approval, and you're just going to drag it down a little bit. If you hold shift, it locks it into place vertically or horizontally, so it makes it a little bit easier to pull down. But we're going to want to make sure we pull down this as far down as we can, so we're only getting white in this background image. We don't have to worry about doing the gradient. We can now do it with CSS. I'm going to turn on this other background layer just so we get the background up here as well. And now we have a couple clean slices to do, and we're ready to start exporting out these images. With that, what you're going to want to do is click on File, Save for Web, or it is a very long kind of hotkey. And you're going to click on that, and it's going to start rendering as the optimized aspect of this. So I'm just going to expand this a little bit more so we can see more of the image. And what I'm going to do is, it has this slice selection tool still here, and that's going to allow you to choose the slice that you want to take over. And you can do it with all of the slices that you've selected as well as slices that you haven't selected. But we're going to choose this one top image, and we're going to hold space and click and hold to move that into the right position. And look at a little optimization preset. So you can notice that you have a couple standardized optimizations here. They're pretty good as starter points, but since this is an illustration, we know that if we use a JPEG, it's going to end up being it's going to start rasterizing this. It could also potentially work only because the lines are a little bit more faded and have a little bit of pixelation to them. So we're going to click on PNG first, and then we're going to actually look at if we can turn off the transparency and see if this number down here starts changing based on that. So 534K is an image size you do not want to use. You can also click on this little arrow to see what exact timeline is going to be. Generally, you want a page to load in 3 seconds. So off the bat, even with 1.5 megabytes per second, it's hitting 4 seconds with this image alone. So if that's the case, we're going to want to look at other methods or other possibilities of slicing this out. So the next one would be to try JPEG. What you can notice off the bat is that it automatically just dropped it to 180.9K. And you can actually finesse this a little bit more by using this quality slider. And ideally, you would always want to use 100, but it's never going to be that case. You're never going to want to use 0 because you can now start seeing the pixelation that's being placed around these objects. So you have to find that sweet spot between both that gives you the best optimization but doesn't impact the image. And at this point, we're going to use just these settings to test out base numbers. So we're going to start off with very high, which is the most common. It puts the quality to 80%. You can notice that you don't actually see any degradation here. And it's now 203K. So we're going to try one lower, high. It's moving it to 132.2. Now I can start actually seeing a little bit of pixelation in these areas. So if you look at the book and you zoom it into this book, you can start seeing a little bit of pixelation around the solid colors, which we don't want. So that means that 60 quality is too low for what we're actually looking for. You can actually notice it above the frog too. So at that point, we're going to go to very high, and we're going to try the 75 or 70 point to see what we can get out of it. So you can notice now that it's not as bad. The area above the frog is almost gone. The file size is 161. We're going to try just 75 now. And you can now see that it's even cleaner. We have 180, so there's a very slight file difference. But that's 5% difference is worth the additional K off. So we're going to want to stick with 70 on this image. We're just going to double click this magnifying glass at the top again. And it's going to bring us back to this initial view. So from there, we've got this slice set up already, and you're going to want to double click on it. Change the username to something that actually makes sense. It's going to be the BG background. And then we're just going to hit OK. We don't necessarily need any of this additional information in here because we're not exporting any HTML, CSS. So we're going to click and hold space to get our little hand, and we're going to move to the second image. We're going to click on the second one, and you can see that it's a PNG already. It's hitting 94.74K. We can try a JPEG, see if it's any less, which it is. And let's see if very high is much different. So 5K difference, not much difference in the actual image itself. You can actually notice I just hit high there. You can see how much that number jumps from 48 to 33, and this is actually fine quality, so we can keep going. Check. So medium, you start seeing that degradation in her hair, and around her arm, and in her shirt a little bit, so we want to avoid that. We'll stick with high, which is around 60, and that'll be as good as we're going to get for that image. So we're going to do the same thing with these bottom two. Look, I've ruined the image already. So at this point, we're going to do these in a second pass, but one thing I forgot to do was double click and say content image, just so we can word it. You can always rename these afterwards. And we're going to look at these. We don't necessarily need to update these right now because we're going to come back through and do it a second time. We're going to hit save at this point, and in this, you're going to want to save it in a temporary folder. You don't want to put it directly into your image folder because it could potentially throw all those little extra slices in that aren't necessary. But we're going to make a new folder, say, call it temp, and we're going to choose, instead of all slices, we're going to choose all user slices. These will just give us those slices that we've given and highlighted in blue. We also don't have to worry about this save as name unless we're slicing the random areas as well, which to get that you would just hit all slices. If you wanted a single slice, you can choose the selected slices. So we're going to hit save on this. From there, that prompt will close, and we shall look and see our little temp folder here. Go into images. Now we can see that these ones are already ruined, so we're going to just toss those. But we can look at these and make sure that they're clean enough. So they're good. And you can drag and drop these into your respective image folder. So I'm just going to go back through and clean up these last two slices. So when I move that background down, you can now see that it covered up those areas. So I'm going to click on that background again using my arrow tool with auto select selected, and I'm just going to turn off that layer now because I don't need to worry about the two top images anymore. I can do these three. So I'm going to go back into that save for web prompt and just finish off those last three images. So I'll click on this, put TPL logo, this one, Library and Archives logo. This I actually should put EN because they have a different logo for French. Then I'll do TD logo and hit OK. Now I'm going to look at just these. You can see that these are actually extremely small already. You can check JPEG. You can actually see that the size jumps up since it is a vector logo. So we want to make sure we stick with PNG. Generally 24 is good. 8 is pretty good too. If you have single colors, 8 normally works. But you can see if there's any degradation difference between the two. If there's not, then we're good with PNG 8. Same thing with this second image, just check this compared to PNG 8. We've dropped it down a fair amount, but now you can actually see that you're getting little dots around the Canadian flag, and it looks a bit off for the way it's sliced right now, or the way that it's optimized right now. So we're going to try PNG 24, and we're just going to leave it at this rather than mess around with it too much because it's such a small file size. The TD one as well, we're going to hit just PNG 8 because you're going to notice no degradation difference between it, but you're going to notice the file size chop in half. So when we're done those 3 slices, we are going to hit, and we are going to actually this time select these 3 slices. If you hold Shift, you can actually click on multiple slices at once. So now we have each of the 3 selected. You're not going to want to play with any of these presets, but if you hit save and now you choose selected slices, we're not going to go over those images that we had just created already. So save, and there we go. Now we want to just check our images again, see if there's anything wrong with them. They look pretty good to me, and then you're good to go on these. So that's the main reason, or main way to slice using the actual slice and slice select tool. You can always save this file again and keep these slices for future use, but you'll just have to make sure you turn on the rest of the layer so you're not losing anything else in the process. So that's the end of this tutorial. The next one will be how to slice using the crop tool, and that will show you how to do a few more of the images in the process. So I'm going to actually not save this. Feel free to do it if you want. If I don't save it, then all these layers are going to appear again. And since it's easy enough to drag and drop these boxes based on my original slices, I don't have to worry too much about it. But thanks. If you have any questions, just let me know and we can walk through some more. Have fun.